David, Claire, Emma, and Noah Haynie seemed like the perfect family living in a quiet, peaceful town. But one night their lives would be shattered in a massacre, so horrific it would shock the world and leave a community questioning everything they thought was safe. The Haynie family lived in a town that seemed to exist in a different world, one untouched by the chaos and violence that often filled the news. The streets were lined with trees that swayed gently in the wind, and the houses glowed with warm lights at night. Neighbors waved at each other during morning walks, and children played freely in yards, their laughter echoing between the quiet homes. In the middle of this serene neighborhood stood the Haynie residence, a modest but charming house with a neatly trimmed lawn, bright flower beds, and a small porch that looked inviting to anyone passing by. The family: David, a mid-level accountant, his wife, Claire, a schoolteacher, and their two children, Emma and Noah, seemed to fit perfectly into the picture of suburban normality. They attended local events, participated in town fairs, and were always ready to lend a hand to anyone in need. To outsiders, nothing about them suggested that darkness could ever touch their lives. Despite their ordinary appearance, there was something quietly meticulous about the Haynies. David was known for his attention to detail, organizing his work and home life with almost obsessive precision. Claire maintained the household meticulously, balancing her teaching responsibilities with household duties and extracurricular activities for the children. On weekends, the family could often be seen together at the local park or at small gatherings with neighbors, laughing and sharing meals. But behind the cheerful smiles, subtle signs of unease were beginning to surface, unnoticed by most. Claire occasionally mentioned strange noises at night, unexplained knocks on the door, or fleeting shadows in the corners of their home. David dismissed these as nothing more than the creaks and groans of an old house, though he sometimes felt a prickling unease that he couldn't explain. Emma and Noah, children of 7 and 9, sometimes spoke of seeing a shadowy figure outside the window when no one else was home. Their small voices, filled with innocence and fear, were quickly hushed by their parents, who reassured them that everything was fine. Life in the Haynie household followed a rhythm, almost like a clock ticking steadily from day to day. Mornings were filled with the bustle of getting the children ready for school, preparing breakfast, and heading to work. Evenings were calmer, with family dinners, quiet conversations, and the occasional game or movie night. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Yet, within this routine, tension was beginning to build, a tension invisible to the outside world. It was a tension that no one could yet identify, a shadow creeping into their lives without warning. Neighbors admired the family for their politeness, their involvement in the community, and their warmth. But admiration can sometimes mask ignorance, and in this case it concealed the storm gathering just beneath the surface. On one crisp October evening, the last golden rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the town in quiet twilight. The Haynie family went about their evening routines, unaware that this night would mark the beginning of a horror that would shatter their peaceful existence. Outside, the streets were empty, and the town slept peacefully, completely oblivious to the darkness, silently approaching one of its own. The calm, serene neighborhood, so accustomed to safety and routine, was about to witness a tragedy so shocking that it would haunt the community and the world for years to come. In the weeks leading up to the Haynie Family Massacre, small, unusual events began to disrupt their ordinary lives. At first, these incidents seemed insignificant, easily explained away as coincidences or quirks of daily life. The family started receiving strange phone calls, late at night-long periods of silence on the other end, followed by abrupt hang-ups. No one left messages, and there was never any pattern to the calls. Claire tried to ignore them, assuming it was a prank, while David grew quietly concerned, checking the caller ID repeatedly, but finding nothing unusual. The children, unaware of the seriousness, sometimes woke in the middle of the night, complaining of hearing footsteps in the hallway, only to find the house empty and silent. Packages began arriving at the door with no return address. Some contained random items, a torn piece of fabric, a small, broken toy, or letters written in strange, indecipherable handwriting. Claire initially assumed these were mistakes from delivery services, but when similar packages continued to appear, unease began to settle in the household. The sense of being watched grew stronger, even as the family tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. The pets, usually calm and affectionate, became restless, barking at shadows and refusing to sleep in certain rooms. These small disturbances started to wear on the family's nerves, creating a tension that lingered beneath their daily routines. Neighbors noticed subtle changes in the Haynie household as well. The front door was left slightly ajar more than once, and lights flickered at odd times of the day. People passing by the house sometimes saw fleeting movements inside, shadows crossing windows, or the curtains twitching when no one was near. Despite these anomalies, no one could pinpoint exactly what was wrong. The family smiled and waved when seen outside, giving no indication of the anxiety building inside their home. Life on the surface appeared unchanged, but behind closed doors, the invisible presence of fear was growing heavier by the day. David began keeping a private journal, noting every strange occurrence in meticulous detail. He recorded the unexplained phone calls, the odd deliveries, and the peculiar behavior of the children and pets. His entries reflected growing dread, though he still clung to hope that it was all harmless. Claire, meanwhile, tried to distract herself with household projects and social commitments, but her unease was palpable. She avoided being alone in certain rooms, and sometimes she would pause mid-task, listening intently for sounds no one else could hear. The children, sensing the tension between their parents, became quieter, less playful, and more withdrawn. Outside observers had no way of knowing the storm approaching the Haynie family. The town continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware that something was lurking, studying the family and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The seemingly minor disturbances, each easy to dismiss, were actually pieces of a larger, more terrifying puzzle. Every strange phone call, every mysterious package, every flickering light was a warning, a precursor to the horror that would soon consume the Haynie household. By the time the town would realize the danger, it would be far too late. The quiet, orderly lives of David, Claire, Emma, and Noah were on the brink of being shattered, and nothing in the world could prepare anyone for what would come next. The day of the massacre began like any other in the Haynie household, with the early morning sunlight streaming through the windows and the faint sounds of birds outside. David rose before the others, preparing breakfast while glancing occasionally at his phone, half expecting another strange call that never came. Claire followed soon after, organizing the children's school bags and making sure everything was in order for the day. Emma and Noah were cheerful at first, laughing over small jokes and stories, unaware of the storm silently closing in around them. There was an ordinary rhythm to their morning, the same one the neighbors had seen countless times, and yet beneath the calm, tension had begun to coil like a hidden serpent. As the family went about their routines, subtle disturbances hinted that something was amiss. Doors that had been securely locked appeared slightly ajar. Objects seemed out of place, though nothing appeared missing. The pets, unusually alert, moved from room to room, occasionally letting out low growls or scratching at the windows. No one could explain the sudden change in behavior. Claire paused several times to listen, certain she had heard movement in the hallways, though each time silence greeted her. David tried to maintain a sense of control, telling himself that the family was merely tired from the week, that he was imagining the sounds, that everything was normal. By mid-morning, the air in the house had grown heavy. The children, usually playful, were unusually quiet. Emma kept glancing out the window, her small hands clutching the curtains as if expecting someone to appear. Noah wandered from room to room, peeking behind doors as if following invisible footsteps. David and Claire exchanged concerned glances, their anxiety slowly rising as the day progressed. Outside, the neighborhood carried on, unaware of the tension within the Haynie home. Neighbors walked their dogs, joggers passed by, and mail carriers delivered letters, none noticing the subtle signs of impending disaster. Around noon, the first signs of the unimaginable began to manifest. A window on the side of the house was found slightly open, though no one could recall leaving it that way. Shadows moved in corners where shadows should not have been. There was a quiet sense of being observed, a weight pressing down on the family that no explanation could satisfy. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, amplified the fear growing inside the house. The ordinary rhythms of the day, preparing lunch, sorting chores, checking homework, became increasingly overshadowed by a creeping dread that none could ignore. As the afternoon approached, the atmosphere turned sinister. Lights flickered, the pets whimpered and hid under furniture, and a strange, almost imperceptible smell lingered in the air. The family moved cautiously through the rooms, each step hesitant, each glance filled with suspicion. Though they could not see the source of the danger, they could feel it closing in, wrapping around them like an invisible hand. By the time the first scream would have shattered the walls, the house was already a cage of terror, the stage set for a horror beyond imagination. What started as an ordinary day ended in darkness, with a quiet house that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the nightmare to descend. And by the time the neighbors realized something was wrong, the day that began with sunlight and laughter would be etched forever in history as the day terror struck an unsuspecting family. By the time the first neighbors noticed that something was wrong, the quiet tension in the Haynie household had already escalated into unimaginable horror. Concern had grown throughout the morning and early afternoon. Mail remained untouched. The children's school buses had come and gone without anyone answering the door, and the usual hum of daily life inside the house had fallen completely silent. Friends and neighbors, growing increasingly uneasy, finally called the authorities, fearing that something terrible had happened. When the police arrived, the atmosphere in the neighborhood had shifted. The streets, once filled with the gentle rhythm of suburban life, now held a suffocating stillness, as if the town itself had sensed the terror waiting behind the Haynies' front door. When the officers stepped inside, the scene they encountered was unlike anything they had imagined. The house, previously a place of warmth and comfort, had been transformed into a tableau of chaos and violence. Furniture was overturned, personal belongings were scattered across the floor, and walls bore marks of a struggle. The air was heavy, thick with a silence that spoke louder than any sound could. It was immediately clear that this was no ordinary crime. The level of brutality suggested planning, precision, and an alarming degree of malice. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, ruling out robbery as a motive. The officers moved cautiously through the rooms, their eyes scanning for any signs of life, but the house held only death and devastation. Forensic teams soon arrived, bringing with them an array of tools to analyze the scene. Every detail mattered. Fingerprints on doorknobs, smudges on windows, traces of hair and fibers on the floor. The investigators worked meticulously, piecing together the sequence of events from what little evidence remained. In the kitchen, they found signs of a hurried meal that had been abandoned mid-preparation. In the living room, scattered toys and overturned chairs hinted at the children's last moments. Each discovery painted a grim picture of fear and desperation, suggesting that the family had been acutely aware of the danger, but powerless to stop it. Neighbors gathered outside, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. Whispers filled the air, questions without answers spilling from mouths that could not comprehend the horror within the house. How could something so violent occur in a place they had always considered safe? The juxtaposition of normalcy and brutality left the entire community paralyzed with fear. People who had waved to the Haynies just days before now recoiled in horror, unable to reconcile the friendly family they knew with the scene of carnage being revealed. As investigators continued their work, it became clear that the Haynie Family Massacre was more than a simple act of violence. The crime had been calculated, the result of careful observation and cold intent. Every detail, from the timing to the arrangement of the house after the attack, suggested a perpetrator who knew the family intimately and understood their routines. The small town, once proud of its safety and tranquility, was left to grapple with a terrifying reality. The horror had not been random. It had been deliberate, and it had been personal. By nightfall, the house was cordoned off, lights casting long shadows across the yard, illuminating the devastation. The Haynie family was gone. Their lives ended in a single day that would haunt the town forever. The discovery of their bodies sent shockwaves far beyond the neighborhood, leaving the world stunned and demanding answers. In that quiet, peaceful street, a nightmare had unfolded, and nothing would ever make the community feel safe again. The investigation into the Haynie Family Massacre began immediately, but from the start, it was clear that solving this crime would not be easy. Detectives combed through every inch of the house, collecting fingerprints, fibers, and traces of DNA. They photographed the chaotic scene, noting every detail from the placement of furniture to the smallest scuff mark on the walls. Forensic experts worked tirelessly, trying to reconstruct the sequence of events. Each clue seemed to tell a story, yet the full picture remained frustratingly elusive. The meticulous nature of the crime suggested someone who knew the family well, someone patient and calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Outside the house, the neighborhood had become a hub of anxious activity. Residents watched from behind closed curtains as police cars and unmarked vehicles arrived in waves. Reporters began to arrive, documenting the tragedy for a stunned public. The town, previously quiet and safe, now pulsed with tension, every passerby wondering who among them could be capable of such horror. The fear was palpable, spreading like a shadow over every street and home, leaving residents constantly looking over their shoulders. As investigators dug deeper, strange patterns began to emerge. The surveillance cameras on nearby homes, often overlooked by neighbors, revealed a shadowy figure near the Haynie house during the early hours of the morning. The person moved deliberately, carefully avoiding the direct gaze of cameras, but leaving enough trace to suggest planning and intent. Phone records and digital footprints were scrutinized, revealing calls and messages that seemed meaningless at first, but slowly hinted at observation and familiarity with the family's routines. Everything pointed to someone who had been watching the Haynies for weeks, if not months, preparing for this horrifying event with patience and precision. Detectives also explored potential motives. Financial troubles, personal grievances, or hidden grudges were all considered. Interviews with friends, neighbors, and coworkers revealed that, while the family appeared normal and friendly on the surface, there were subtle hints of private stress. Claire had expressed concerns about strange phone calls and packages, while David had begun keeping detailed notes about odd occurrences in their home. Even the children, Emma and Noah, had mentioned fleeting glimpses of shadows outside their windows. While these facts alone did not reveal the killer, they painted a picture of a family increasingly aware that something was wrong, yet powerless to prevent the looming tragedy. The combination of forensic evidence and behavioral analysis slowly began to narrow down the pool of suspects. Investigators looked for anyone with access to the neighborhood, anyone who knew the family personally, and anyone who might have a reason for revenge or obsession. The tension mounted as the realization grew that the perpetrator could be someone trusted, someone who had blended seamlessly into the fabric of the town. Every new lead seemed to complicate the case further, revealing the unsettling truth that the danger had been closer than anyone had imagined. As days turned into weeks, the investigation became a race against time. Detectives worked around the clock, following every lead analyzing every fragment of evidence. The deeper they delved, the more it became apparent that the massacre was not a random act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated crime. The community watched anxiously, waiting for answers, knowing that each passing hour without justice left the shadow of fear lingering over their streets. The Haynie Family Massacre had shattered the town's sense of safety, and the hunt for the killer became a story of suspense, obsession, and relentless pursuit of the truth. As the investigation into the Haynie Family Massacre progressed, detectives began uncovering a shocking and unsettling truth. The killer was not a stranger lurking in the shadows, but someone who had known the family intimately. Evidence gradually pointed toward a person who had been close to the Haynies, someone who understood their routines, their habits, and their vulnerabilities. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team and the small town alike, shaking the foundation of trust the community had taken for granted. It became clear that this was no random act of violence. It was personal, calculated, and meticulously executed. For weeks, investigators pored over records, cross-referencing phone logs, emails, and financial transactions. Small inconsistencies emerged: gaps in alibis, unexplained absences, and subtle manipulations of circumstances that had previously seemed coincidental. Friends and acquaintances were interviewed again, this time with a new lens, searching for any detail that might indicate hidden resentments, jealousy, or betrayal. Each conversation revealed more layers of complexity. People who had once appeared friendly now seemed suspect, their behavior re-examined under the scrutiny of suspicion. It was a difficult and disorienting process, forcing the town to question the nature of familiarity itself. Forensic evidence added to the growing suspicion. The careful placement of objects, the precise timing of actions, and the understanding of the family's habits all suggested that the perpetrator had spent significant time observing the household. The investigators noticed patterns that only someone with inside knowledge could have known: which doors were left unlocked at specific times, when the children were out of sight, and which routines allowed the house to be unguarded. This was no amateur. The perpetrator had studied the family, mapping their lives like a blueprint to orchestrate the perfect crime. As the investigation delved deeper, hidden tensions and secrets began to surface. Financial discrepancies in the family's accounts hinted at disputes over money. Old arguments and grudges that had been buried under polite smiles and everyday interactions came to light. Personal relationships, once considered stable, were now being questioned. Each revelation added another layer of horror, making it harder for anyone to reconcile the friendly, ordinary family with the intricate web of betrayal and violence surrounding them. The town's sense of security was shattered. The realization that the killer could be someone trusted, someone who had blended seamlessly into their daily lives, left the community in fear and disbelief. Neighbors began to look at each other with suspicion, wondering who could be capable of such calculated cruelty. Every familiar face became a potential threat, and the very notion of safety within one's home was forever altered. The investigators knew that identifying the perpetrator was only the first step. Understanding the motive, the planning, and the psychology behind the massacre was equally important. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly fell into place, one truth became undeniable. The Haynie family's tragedy was not an isolated act of violence, but a deliberate betrayal. The killer had infiltrated the family's world, manipulating events and exploiting trust to commit a crime that would haunt the town and the world for years. The revelation that the murderer was someone so close to the family marked a turning point in the case. What had started as a baffling and horrific crime was now understood as a chilling reminder of how danger can hide in plain sight. The stage was set for the next chapter: the pursuit, capture, and ultimate unmasking of the person who had destroyed the Haynie family from within. The hunt for the Haynie family killer became a high-stakes operation, consuming law enforcement and the community alike. After weeks of painstaking investigation, every lead began to converge toward a single person, a figure previously considered trusted and ordinary, someone who had blended seamlessly into the lives of the family and the town. The revelation that the perpetrator could be so close intensified the urgency of the search. Detectives worked tirelessly, following phone records, financial trails, and surveillance footage, piecing together the movements of a person whose careful planning had nearly gone undetected. Every discovery added pressure as the community watched with bated breath, desperate for answers, yet fearful of what those answers might reveal. The suspect had proven elusive. They had vanished from sight, leaving only subtle traces that suggested deliberate evasion. Investigators coordinated with local and state authorities, canvassing neighborhoods, checking vehicles, and reviewing countless hours of footage from nearby cameras. Digital footprints, once overlooked, became critical evidence. Every email, social media interaction, and location ping told a fragment of a story that slowly revealed the suspect's patterns and intentions. Forensic experts combed through this data, identifying points where the perpetrator had deviated from ordinary routines, seemingly in anticipation of the next step in their plan. As the search intensified, the tension in the town grew unbearable. Residents locked their doors, double-checked windows, and kept watch over neighbors' homes. Conversations were hushed, and familiar faces were scrutinized with suspicion. The idea that someone so close to the family could commit such atrocities made every casual interaction feel charged with uncertainty. Fear had become a constant companion, gnawing at the edges of daily life as the realization sank in that the danger had once lived among them. Finally, after relentless effort and a breakthrough from a seemingly minor clue, a misplaced receipt, a trace of a vehicle, a surveillance frame once thought insignificant, the investigators closed in. The suspect was located in a small rental property just outside town, attempting to maintain a low profile. The arrest was swift but carefully planned, minimizing risk and ensuring the suspect could not escape again. Law enforcement officers approached with caution, aware of the perpetrator's meticulous planning and capacity for calculated behavior. When taken into custody, the suspect's demeanor was chillingly calm. There was no immediate outburst, no remorse evident in their expression. During questioning, fragments of the plan and motives began to emerge. Investigators learned that the killer had spent months studying the family, observing patterns, and identifying vulnerabilities. The level of premeditation was terrifying. Every step had been executed with careful consideration, leaving little room for error. What made the case even more horrifying was the revelation that the perpetrator had carefully manipulated events to avoid detection, infiltrating the family's life in ways no one had suspected. The town and the world were stunned. The person who had seemed ordinary, trustworthy, and unremarkable was capable of unimaginable cruelty. The arrest brought relief, yet the haunting truth lingered. A family had been destroyed by someone they knew, someone who had hidden in plain sight. The nightmare had ended in the immediate sense, but the psychological scars, the fear, and the lingering questions about trust and betrayal would haunt the community forever. The Haynie Family Massacre had exposed a darkness that no one could have anticipated, a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from those closest to us. The aftermath of the Haynie Family Massacre left a scar that would never fully heal. The once quiet town, known for its friendly streets and sense of security, was forever changed. Residents walked cautiously, doors were bolted even in broad daylight, and the familiar rhythm of daily life was replaced by a lingering unease. The tragedy had shattered the illusion of safety, reminding everyone that violence could strike even in the most ordinary places. The community struggled to reconcile the horrific events with the seemingly normal lives they had once taken for granted, and fear lingered like a shadow over every street and home. In the weeks that followed, investigators continued to uncover details that only deepened the horror. The meticulous planning behind the massacre became clearer, revealing just how much the killer had studied the family. Every routine had been noted, every weakness exploited, The level of premeditation was unsettling, leaving both the authorities and the public in disbelief. The case became a focal point for national media, drawing attention from experts in criminal psychology and true crime enthusiasts alike. Articles, documentaries, and news reports detailed the sequence of events, each retelling reinforcing the shocking reality of how trust and familiarity had been weaponized against the Haynies. The town's sense of normalcy was further disrupted as residents grappled with the emotional impact. Families became hyper-vigilant, neighbors watched each other more closely, and social gatherings lost the carefree warmth they once had. Local schools and community centers held counseling sessions for children and adults, trying to address the trauma that had touched everyone, directly or indirectly. The massacre had not only taken 4 lives, but had also infected the town with fear and suspicion. People who had once shared casual conversations on porches now spoke in hushed tones, the weight of unspoken anxieties pressing down on them. Legal proceedings against the perpetrator became another stage of the nightmare. The trial revealed chilling details about the killer's planning, motives, and execution. Courtroom sessions were tense and emotionally charged, with the families of the victims present to witness justice unfold. The public followed each revelation closely, horrified by the calculated cruelty and cold efficiency with which the crime had been committed. Though the legal system ultimately delivered justice, the sense of closure was incomplete. The lives lost could never be restored, and the memory of the Haynie family, as final moments, would remain etched into the minds of the community forever. Over time, the town took steps to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. Neighborhood watch programs were strengthened. Home security systems became commonplace, and local law enforcement increased patrols. Yet, the emotional legacy of the massacre lingered. The once trusted neighbors now carried a silent awareness that danger could come from within their own community. The Haynie family's story served as a haunting reminder of the fragility of safety, trust, and normalcy. Even years later, the house where the massacre occurred remained a symbol of tragedy. Though repairs were made and new families eventually moved in, the shadow of the past could never fully be erased. The town learned a painful lesson: that terror can arrive in the most familiar places, that betrayal can come from those closest to us, and that some scars are too deep to heal. The Haynie Family Massacre shocked the world not only for its brutality, but for the reminder that darkness can lurk quietly in the heart of everyday life, forever changing the way people see their homes, their neighbors, and their sense of safety.